Campaign 2020 is sponsored by Wisconsin Hospital Association, Quick Trip, Wisconsin Counties Association, Wisconsin Realtors Association, and Wisconsin Operating Engineers Local 139.
State Representative Jodi Emerson of Eau Claire is a Democrat seeking re-election in the 91st Assembly District. Jodi, welcome back to WisconsinEye.
Thanks for having me, Steve.
Well, okay, you've had one full term. You know where things are in the Capitol, but I want to know your top priority if you're re-elected.
Well, I think our biggest priority is going to be twofold. We need to look at recovering from COVID and the economic crisis that has come from that. And also with this census happening right now, one of our biggest tasks in the Assembly is going to be drawing new maps and making sure that we are able to get the fairest maps that we can for the people of the state of Wisconsin.
So you just said you like the People's Maps Commission proposal of Governor Evers?
Well, I think anybody who is actually looking at the maps realizes that we have one of the most gerrymandered states in the country. There was a Harvard study that came out recently rating states on a scale of 1 to 100, 1 being the worst gerrymandered, 100 being completely nonpartisan and fairly drawn. And Wisconsin scored a 3 on that. Not third on the list, but they scored a 3. So, it's obvious that we have maps drawn in a very partisan manner. And that affects the work that we do in the Capitol on behalf of the people. People are not getting fairly represented in the Capitol with maps this way. And so we do need to do them in the most fair way that we can. And I'm excited that the governor has put out that proposal and that this commission is getting going. We know that, ultimately it's the state legislature's responsibility to pass the maps. But that doesn't mean that we can't take the proposal that the People's Maps Commission comes up with and pass that. So I'm looking forward to seeing how this shakes out in the next 2 years.
Okay, now you mentioned the COVID pandemic as your number one issue. Tell me what next steps you want taken to address this pandemic.
First and foremost, we really need to get this pandemic under control. Eau Claire being a college town, we're seeing, like many other college towns around the state and the country, our numbers absolutely skyrocketing right now. As people go back to school, whether that's K-12 or post-secondary, we're getting people together that haven't been together for several months, and we are seeing these numbers skyrocketing. Our 20s people are the fastest growing population of COVID positive people in the state, certainly in our area. So first and foremost, we can't recover from the pandemic until we get the pandemic under control. And if we learned anything from the pandemic that we had 100 years ago, we know that the fall is going to be when this second wave is going to be coming. And I think we're seeing the start of it now. So people need to take this seriously. They need to keep social distancing. They need to wear masks. They need to do what the health experts and science is telling us to do. I want to get out and I want to be with my friends and gathering with people, doing what I want to do. But as being responsible adults, sometimes we need to do what we have to do, not what we want to do.
So on September 28th, when the governor has a choice of extending the statewide mask edict or letting it lapse, you want him to continue it, Jodi?
I think people need to be wearing masks, whether we have a mandate in place or not. I definitely agree with people that say that this is about personal responsibility. I'm seeing plenty of people around who aren't wearing masks, even though we do have a mandate in place. So I think people are going to continue to do whatever they want to do, regardless of what the governor says. Personally, I'll be wearing my mask, and I hope that my friends and neighbors continue to do that as well. It protects all of us. I'm glad I'm not in the governor's position right now, though.
If the pandemic means we won't collect, and I'll make up a number, $1 billion in taxes in the next year, how would you fill that shortfall?
We are really going to have some very tough budget decisions to come by. We've been talking about this since the pandemic hit in March and April, knowing that this was slowing down our tax collection on various levels. I'm disappointed that we haven't really been talking about this at the Assembly and State Senate level and looking at some budget repair bills, that we're kicking the can down the road once again and not solving some smaller problems. We're waiting until it gets bigger. So I think it's one of those things that we can't say, here's where the cut needs to be when we're talking bigger numbers. And we'll have to see what comes out of this. We're going to have to make cuts across the board, little bits to make up for it. But it's going to be tough decisions because at the same time, places like our education system, places like our prisons are going to actually need more money to keep their workers and the people who are in their care safe. So we're actually going to need more money to get PPE, to get cleaning supplies, things like that, to keep our students, our teachers, people who are in our prisons safe. So there's some places we're not going to be able to cut back on. I think the governor has done a great job of using our federal care dollars to help those places get the supplies that they need right now. But we're going to have to make some tough decisions in the next year or two.
We've seen hospitals in Wisconsin and nationally play a key role treating COVID-19 patients. Mm-hmm. If you're reelected voting on the next state budget, should hospitals get an even greater priority than they may have gotten in the current budget, Jodi?
Again, with our federal CARES dollars, we've seen some money going towards the hospitals. Healthcare in general is going to be a big problem. We've seen across our nation millions of people losing their healthcare because it was tied to their work. I think we are at a point where we're going to really need to rethink healthcare as a whole. When we have a situation that causes so many people to even temporarily lose their jobs and their health insurance is tied to their jobs, they then by default lose their health insurance at a time where we need people to be taking care of small problems so they don't get big. Taking care of, is this the flu that I have? Is this the cold? Is this allergies? Or do I have COVID right now? We don't want people putting that off because then it's just going to spread more and more. So there's a lot of things that we can do on the state level, but some of these are going to need to be tackled on the federal level as well. But I don't think that there's anybody out there right now that can look at what's going on in our world today and say healthcare isn't going to be a major factor coming up in the next few years.
What do you think of the Representative Bourne and Senator capping a bill which says if you're an organization and you've complied with COVID guidelines and to protect your patients, customers, employees, patrons, you could not be sued over a COVID positive? Is that a bill you could support?
I would need that to be spelled out a lot more to know what a good faith effort is. I've got a daughter who is a teacher, and their health and safety plan says that she's going to have a plexiglass shield, that all of her students are going to have individual desks versus tables. It's written down in the plan. However, when she showed up for class on her first day, she didn't have any of that. So on paper, her school was making a good faith effort. In reality, they were putting her and the children that attended her classes at serious risk for their health. So we need to spell out what is a good faith effort and making sure that we're really taking care of the people. I'm afraid that some of this liability shield is just another excuse for big business to not do the right thing, not take care of their workers, not take care of their people. And when we think about how we are truly going to get out of some of these crises, it's about people. People are the workers in these businesses. You can't build your business, open your business, run your business, have a profitable business unless you've got people who can work there, customers who can buy things from there. And so unless we are having a people-centered focus on what's going on in our world today, we are just going to continue to drop further and further behind.
Jodi, the drama over policing reform is played out nationally over several months, and it landed on Wisconsin's front door with the Kenosha incidents. The governor's got 9 bills. Republican Senator Weingart has 7 or 8. The speaker's going to form a task force. So here's my question. What, if any, specific policing reforms would you like to see enacted?
Well, first and foremost, I'm disappointed to see that the speaker is kicking the can down the road and doing another task force. If we would have gotten to work as a legislature after the murder of George Floyd, we could have had hearings all summer long and had some bills passed and in place that possibly would have prevented what happened in Kenosha from happening. But instead, we didn't do the tough work. There's a lot of things that we could pass and reform. I'm proud to say that the Eau Claire Police Department has done some great work. They've looked proactively at where are our policies, where do we need to change these things. We didn't wait until we had a catastrophe in our city to look at these. We started looking at it after George Floyd, and even before too. Our police department has gotten some really good community policing where there's input and buy-in from the public. Of course, it's not perfect, but I'd like to see some of the things that our Eau Claire Police Department is doing spread throughout the state. And I think it's about having conversations. We can't just flip a switch and things are going to happen. But when we look at task forces, we know that very few pieces of legislation are actually enacted into law that come from task forces. If you look at the water quality task force that happened in this last session, nothing got signed into law from the water quality task force. It's an illusion of actually doing public policy and actually working instead of doing the work, making the changes and having the tough conversations. We're having the conversations, but we're not actually coming out of those conversations with anything tangible and changed into our state statute.
As states around Wisconsin legalize medical and recreational marijuana, what's your position?
I think there's going to be some things that need to change on the federal level. There's certainly some banking issues that come out of states that have, adopted legalizing marijuana because they can't deposit money into banks because of some federal rules. I'd really like to see this tackled on a federal level. I'm not opposed to changing the rules. We're seeing even with just legalizing hemp and getting CBD oil out there, new businesses popping up. So I think that this is a market that we really could take care of. I am concerned about, we see how many impaired drivers we have with just alcohol. I would want to make sure that we have some very reasonable, scientifically proven tests to make sure that we can have some accurate data as far as whether somebody is impaired when it comes to marijuana or not, when it comes to driving, things like that. But we're seeing a lot of states do this successfully. They're getting a lot of tax revenue from it. They're building businesses because of it. And there's also farmers that are succeeding because of having new crops. So I think it's definitely something to look at. And I think we're late enough into the game that we can learn from other states' mistakes and make sure that we're doing it the right way.
Wisconsin is a high property tax state, which means that school districts and local governments have been living with caps and limits on what they can levy in property taxes for more than 20 years. Should those caps continue to try to hold down property taxes on homes?
That is such a hot button topic. We've got people in power in Madison who say, they're for local control, but yet they want to put constraints on locally elected officials so that they can't raise those property taxes. They can't do the job that they were hired by their constituents to do. So I'd like to be able to free that up somewhat, to give the power to a school board member, a county board member, a city council member to do the job that they're elected to do. Of course, we don't want to see anything go up drastically, so we might want to loosen the caps a little bit. But every single place right now is going to be hurting in the next couple of years because of the economic crisis that we have with COVID. We have to start looking at things differently. It can't be all property taxes, but we need to do what we can to make sure that we are funding the services that we need to keep our community safe and growing. And so whether that's transportation, whether that's police, whether that's schools, when people look at a community where they want to live, they don't look at it and say, well, gosh, that's a nice house, but the whole town is falling apart around there. I'm going to move there. They look at what's the business climate like? What are the schools like? What are the roads like? What is there fun to do in that city? And they want the atmosphere of moving to a place. And so what can we do as government entities to make sure that we are setting our communities up for success is how we need to look at it.
Does that mean you're willing to consider options like the bill introduced by Representative Goyke, which would let, if a referendum passed, the city of Milwaukee levy a half-cent sales tax? Do we need to give cities, villages, and towns that type of revenue options?
I think if that community is asking and willing to do something like that, I think it's something that we should look into.
The governor last year recommended raising the gas tax to stabilize how we pay for highways and bridges. Could you vote to raise the gas tax?
Absolutely. I was very disappointed to see that the funding for our roads, which did increase, if I'm remembering my numbers correctly from a year ago, was only on Wisconsin citizens. We've got plenty of people coming in from Minnesota, Illinois, traveling through our area, and they're not paying additionally to fund our roads. So we did have some transfer fees and some title and licensing fees that went up, and that's how we were funding our roads. But people weren't willing to fund it through additional gas taxes. We've frozen those several years ago. If we would have just kept indexing that with inflation, we probably wouldn't be in the situation we are with such a problem with, transportation funding right now. So I don't think it needs to be completely on gas tax, but I also don't think it needs to be completely on registration and title fees as well. The people who are using the roads need to be the ones who are paying for it. And if I'm driving 70,000 miles a year, I should pay more than somebody who is driving their car once a week, a few blocks from their house to the grocery store.
If a school board or a local government plans a major public works project, should they have to give a preference to Wisconsin businesses?
And that's a tough question because as stewards of taxpayer money, we want to make wise decisions about that. We also know when we are funding our local businesses, more money is coming back to our local communities. And so I wouldn't want to see you absolutely have to use a local company, because if there's somebody, and I especially think of some of our border communities, if you're in Hudson and there's business in Minnesota that's right across the river that has a better price on something, significantly better price, maybe they should be able to go with that company. So I don't want to say, no, we never use anybody out of state, but we wouldn't want to see somebody have to pay twice the price out of taxpayer dollars for the same services that they could get from a very reasonable company that is maybe just right across the river. So there needs to be a balancing act with that. And this is where we need common sense government to come into play.
Final question, differences between you and your opponent on November 3?
I'm not very familiar with my opponent. I don't think I've ever met him before. So I'm looking forward to hopefully getting to debate him virtually or in person so I can meet him and get to know a little bit about him. But, I'm going to continue to do the work that I do, which is working for the people of Eau Claire. I'm a lifelong resident of the city of Eau Claire. I have strong roots in this community. People in this community know me, know my family, know how hard I work for them. And I think the last few months out of the COVID pandemic has just really shown exactly how much I am in it for my community, whether it's working to get some arts funding for the Pablo Center, whether it's helping constituents get unemployment access, businesses get loans through the state or federal government to continue doing what they do, even though we are in a pandemic. My focus is on the people of the city of Eau Claire, and I'll continue to work for them until I'm told to vacate my office. So hopefully that'll continue through the next couple of years. I've really enjoyed this first term and working for the people of Eau Claire. I just believe it's part of community service. So
thank you. State Representative Jodi Emerson of Eau Claire is a Democrat seeking re-election in the 91st Assembly District. The election's November 3. Jodi, thank you for talking to WisconsinEye.
Thanks for having me, Steve.
Take care. Thank you.
Campaign 2020 is sponsored by Wisconsin Hospital Association, Quick Trip, Wisconsin Counties Association, Wisconsin Realtors Association, and Wisconsin Operating Engineers Local 139.